Which of these vanished restaurants do you wish you could eat at one more time? Share your memories, because they weren't just places to dine, they were part of Britain's story. Little Chef. Few roadside stops were as iconic as Little Chef. Founded in 1958, the red and white diners dotted Britain's motorways, promising weary travellers a hot meal and a break from the road. Their all-day breakfast became legend. Fried eggs, sausages, bacon, beans, and toast stacked high on white plates. Families on holiday piled into booths, children scribbling on activity menus, while parents sipped tea poured from metal pots. For working-class Britons, Little Chef wasn't glamorous, but it was dependable. A place of pit stops, laughter, and the smell of frying bacon drifting into the car park. By the 2000s, changing tastes and fierce competition from motorway service giants spelled its decline. Today, only a few traces remain, but for those who remember, a Little Chef stop wasn't just about food, it was part of the journey itself. Burney Inns. In the 1960s and 70s, Burney Inns were the place for a proper night out. With their dark wood interiors, red leather seating, and waiters in crisp white shirts, they promised steak, chips, and sophistication at an affordable price, and couples went there for anniversaries, families for celebrations, and businessmen for reliable meals. The menu rarely changed: prawn cocktail, rump steak, and Black Forest gatto. Simple, predictable, and beloved. Burney Inns symbolised an era when dining out felt like luxury, even if the food was basic. It was about atmosphere as much as appetite, a taste of glamour within reach of the working class. By the 1980s, the chain faded as tastes shifted and competition grew. But for millions, Burney Inns weren't just restaurants. They were memories of first dates, special nights, and the feeling that you'd stepped into something grand. Wimpy. Long before McDonald's dominated British high streets, there was Wimpy. Born in the 1950s and booming by the 60s, Wimpy introduced Britons to the American-style hamburger. With bright red booths and plastic menus, Wimpy offered burgers, milkshakes, and the famous bender in a bun, a Frankfurter curled to fit inside bread. For kids, it was excitement. For adults, a glimpse of modern fast dining. Waitresses served food on real plates, not paper, and families lingered rather than rushing out. It wasn't just about eating quickly, it was about a new experience, wrapped in novelty and fun. By the late 80s, Wimpy was overshadowed by flashier rivals. Many vanished, though a few outposts stubbornly survive. Still, for those who grew up in its heyday, Wimpy was the taste of Britain's first bite of fast food culture. Lyons Corner House. In the heart of London, Lyons Corner Houses were once palaces of tea, cakes and conversation. These vast dining halls employed nippies, uniformed waitresses famed for their brisk efficiency and charm. From the 1900s to their twilight in the 60s, they served millions. Families came for ice cream sundaes, office workers for pies and tea, and tourists for a taste of bustling London life. The marble counters, polished silver, and endless rows of tables gave them an almost theatrical feel. By the 1960s, changing fashions and modern cafes spelled the end. The last corner houses closed in 1977. But their legend lingers. For many, they were more than restaurants. They were London institutions, places where everyday life felt a little grander, where a simple tea became an event. Happy Eater. Road trips in the 70s and 80s weren't complete without a stop at Happy Eater. Known for its Sarmelling cartoon logo, the chain catered to families travelling Britain's growing motorway network. Inside, kids were king. Play areas, colouring sheets, and child-friendly menus made it a haven for parents on long drives. Burgers, chips, and sundaes arrived quickly, while adults tucked into fry-ups or roast-style meals. Happy Eater was more than a pit stop. It was part of the holiday experience, the break you looked forward to, where the kids could run wild and everyone left full. By the 1990s, it was swallowed by rival chains and disappeared from the map. But for a generation, Happy Eater is remembered with warmth, a smiling logo, a family table, and the promise of joy on the open road. Pizzaland. Before Domino's and Pizza Hut conquered the high street, there was Pizzaland. Opening in the 1960s, it was one of the first UK chains to introduce pizza as an affordable everyday meal. With its checkered tablecloths, red plastic menus, and endless offers, like the famous pizza for a penny deal, it quickly became a favourite for families and teenagers. For many, their very first pizza came from Pizzaland. Thin bases, bubbling cheese, and toppings that felt exotic at the time. By the 1990s, competition and expansion troubles led to its collapse, and restaurants were sold off or rebranded. But those who grew up in its heyday still remember the excitement of piling into a booth ordering a pizza that felt like a taste of Italy, even if it was served with chips on the side. Deep Pan Pizza Company. If Pizzaland was Britain's first taste of thin and crispy, Deep Pan Pizza Co. went the other way. With bold branding and generous portions, it introduced diners to thick American-style pies piled high with cheese and toppings. Families loved it because one pizza could feed everyone. Birthdays, school outings, and teenage hangouts often ended with slices dripping in melted cheese, eaten straight from hot pans. The chain grew quickly in the 80s and 90s, but rapid expansion and changing tastes led to its decline. By the 2000s, most branches had closed. Today, only memories remain. The heavy crusts, the bottomless drinks, and the feeling of indulgence that defined the Deep Pan experience. It wasn't authentic Italy, but it was authentic Britain in an age of plenty. The Golden Egg. Bright, cheerful, and unmistakable, the Golden Egg was a staple of British high streets in the 1960s and 70s. Its neon signage and playful branding promised family-friendly dining at prices that felt manageable. Menus revolved around classic grills, fry-ups, and all-day breakfasts. For many children, the Golden Egg meant Sundays dripping with syrup while parents enjoyed simple but filling meals. It was fun, casual, and just a little more exciting than the local cafe. By the late 70s, competition from new chains chipped away at its market. Gradually, the eggs cracked, and the chain disappeared. Still, those who grew up with it remember the Golden Egg with warmth, a place where eating out felt special, and where neon lights on a rainy evening made the high street glow. Aberdeen Angus Steakhouse. With its flashy signage and promises of big steaks, the Aberdeen Angus Steakhouse became a tourist favourite in London during the 60s and 70s. For working-class visitors heading into the city, it was often their first posh steak dinner. Inside, dark interiors and red banquettes set the stage for sizzling platters of meat, chips and peas. Waiters carried steaks on heavy plates, while Black Forest Gâteau often rounded off the meal. Though beloved by some, others mocked its predictable menus and tourist trap vibe. By the 2000s, it struggled against modern steakhouses and international chains, yet its name remains iconic. For many, the Aberdeen Angus Steakhouse wasn't just food, it was London itself. Brash, bold and unforgettable. Garfunkel's. In the 1970s and 80s, Garfunkel's was the place where something for everyone truly meant it. Located mainly in London, its menus offered everything. Burgers, fish and chips, pasta, salads and giant sundaes. For tourists, it was a safe bet. For families, it was a treat. And for teenagers heading into the city for a day out, it became a rite of passage. An affordable restaurant that felt cosmopolitan without being intimidating. With its casual decor and long menus, Garfunkel's captured the spirit of a Britain opening up to global tastes. But as competition sharpened, the chain faded, and by the 2010s most branches were gone. Still, the name brings smiles. Garfunkel's was never cutting edge, but it was comfort, familiarity, and the excitement of eating out in London. Belgium. Before Iceland became a household name, there was Belgium, the frozen food pioneer of the UK. Starting in the 1960s, Belgium made freezers fashionable, selling everything from frozen peas to ready-made pies. Some stores even had cafes attached, where shoppers could grab a quick bite surrounded by the novelty of frozen convenience. For families, Belgium was revolutionary. No more daily trips to the butcher or greengrocer. You could stock up, save time, and still feed a household. Kids loved the brightly packaged ice creams, while parents marvelled at the range. By the late 1980s, Belgium was swallowed by Iceland, and its name quietly vanished. But for those who grew up in its heyday, Belgium was more than a shop. It was the future on a plate, cold, colourful, and unforgettable. Fort's Restaurants. The Fort name once dominated Britain's hospitality scene from hotels to roadside cafes. In the 60s and 70s, Forte's restaurants were familiar stops for travellers and families alike, offering everything from fry-ups to afternoon teas. With their clean interiors, polite service and wide menus, they symbolised reliability. On long car journeys, a Fort stop meant hot food and a chance to stretch your legs. For many working-class families, it was as close as you got to a fine dining experience on the move. By the 1990s, corporate restructuring and takeovers dismantled the empire. The name faded, but the memory of Forte's remains tied to the golden age of British travel, when eating out still felt like an event. Pret-a-manger. Long before Pret became the grab-and-go giant of today, its first incarnation in the 1980s had a very different feel. Quirky, independent, and proudly fresh, it introduced Britons to baguettes, croissants, and continental-style snacks that felt worlds apart from the fry-ups of old. For young workers in London, Pret was exciting, a taste of Europe in the middle of the city. Office staff swapped sandwiches and cling film for baguettes filled with brie, tomatoes, and rocket. Students treated themselves to fresh coffee and a pastry instead of the usual tea and bun. Though the brand would later explode globally, its original era had a small-scale charm that has long since vanished. For those who remember, it wasn't just food, it was a glimpse of a modern Britain beginning to change its appetite. Lyons tea shops. Alongside the grand corner houses, Lyons also ran hundreds of smaller tea shops across Britain. By the 1960s, these were everyday staples for working people, places to stop for a pot of tea, a bun, and a gossip. Waitresses in crisp uniforms bustled between small tables, serving tea in china pots and cakes on doilies. Office girls, pensioners, and shoppers filled the seats, savouring a moment of calm in bustling city streets. For families, Lyons was affordable, friendly, and utterly dependable. The taste of jam tarts, the clink of teaspoons, and the warmth of endless pots of tea still linger in memory. By the 1980s, the chain had faded, but for decades, Lyons tea shops were Britain's communal living room. They weren't fancy, they were familiar, and sometimes that was all you needed. Spudulike. In the late 70s and 80s, baked potatoes had their moment of glory thanks to Spudulike. With its bright branding and hearty menu, it transformed the humble jacket potato into a restaurant meal. Families on shopping trips stopped in for steaming spuds loaded with cheese, beans, tuna, or coleslaw. Cheap filling and endlessly customizable, Spudulike became a staple of high streets and shopping centres. For students and workers, it was the perfect quick meal, hot, comforting, and far cheaper than a burger joint. The smell of freshly baked potatoes drifting through malls became part of the era. Though it survived into the 2000s, changing tastes and competition eventually pushed it off the high street. Yet for those who grew up with it, Spudulike is remembered fondly as the place that proved sometimes the simplest food, served with warmth, is the best. Deep pan Pizza Hut. Before Pizza Hut became the sleek chain we know today, its early UK restaurants in the 70s and 80s had a very different atmosphere. With dim lighting, checked tablecloths, and those endless salad bars, they felt like an American import dropped right into the British high street. Families loved it. A pizza meal out was still a novelty, and kids piled plates high with pasta shells, croutons, and dressings they'd never seen before. Birthdays, first dates, and after-school treats all seemed to happen under those red roofs. Over time, the chain modernised and lost much of its quirky charm. Many older branches closed, leaving only memories. For those who remember, Pizza Hut wasn't just fast food, it was the first taste of America, served with bottomless cola and a slice of excitement. ABC Cafes, Associated British Cinemas. The ABC chain was known for its cinemas, but many of those picture houses had attached cafes that became everyday stops in the 50s and 60s. Cheap, cheerful, and often smoky, they served tea, sandwiches, and fry-ups to cinema-goers and locals alike. For teenagers on Saturday nights, it was the perfect place to meet before or after a film. For workers, it was a quick, filling meal in a familiar setting. The decor wasn't fancy, but the atmosphere was alive with chatter and clinking cups. As cinemas modernised and chains like McDonald's took hold, the ABC cafes slowly disappeared. But their memory lives on in the smell of tea and toast before a film, part of a Britain where the cinema and cafe went hand in hand. BHS cafes. Tucked away in the back of British home stores, the BHS cafe was the secret treat of countless shoppers. With its no-frills trays, plastic cutlery, and hearty portions, it offered a full meal for pocket change. Families stopped mid-shopping for plates of fish and chips, shepherd's pie, or jam sponge with custard. Pensioners met for tea and toasted tea cakes, enjoying the warmth and bustle. For children, it was a chance to sit with mum and dad and watch trays glide across the counter. When BHS collapsed in 2016, the cafes vanished too, but for many they weren't just places to eat, they were part of the Saturday shopping ritual, as much a part of the high street as the stores themselves. Swiss Centre Restaurants, Leicester Square. In the heart of London's West End, the Swiss Centre stood as a quirky landmark from the 60s until the 2000s. Inside, its restaurants served fondue, sausages, and continental pastries that felt exotic to British diners. Tourists flocked there, but so did Londoners eager for something different. The smell of melted cheese and warm bread drifted through the air, while cuckoo clocks and alpine decor transported guests far from Leicester Square. As tastes changed and property values soared, the Swiss Centre closed, but its restaurants remain in memory, places where a meal wasn't just food, it was a miniature holiday in the middle of the city. Ponti's Italian restaurants. Long before Italian food became mainstream, Ponti's brought pasta, pizza, and espresso to British high streets. Founded in the 1960s by an Italian family, it gave everyday Britons their first taste of continental dining. Families crowded in for bowls of spaghetti bolognese. Teenagers tried their first cappuccinos, and couples lingered over shared plates of lasagna. With its checkered decor and warm service, Ponti's felt like a slice of Italy, accessible and affordable. Though some branches survive in London, most of the chain has faded, replaced by slicker rivals. But for those who remember, Ponti's wasn't just a restaurant. It was an introduction to a whole new cuisine, one forkful at a time. The soup kitchen. In the 1960s and 70s, the soup kitchen brought simple, hearty comfort to Britain's high streets. Serving steaming bowls of soup with bread, sandwiches, and hot drinks, it was a haven for workers, students, and shoppers looking for warmth on a budget. The decor was plain, but the atmosphere was lively. Groups crowded around formica tables, coats steaming from the rain, hands wrapped around mugs of tea. For many, it was the kind of place where you felt part of the city's heartbeat, quick, affordable, and always friendly. By the 1980s, new chains offering flashier food eclipsed it, and the soup kitchen quietly disappeared. But its memory lingers in the smell of broth, the clatter of trays, and the feeling that sometimes the simplest food is the most comforting. The coffee pot. Long before Starbucks and Costa dotted every corner, Britain had the coffee pot. It was a small chain of cafes known for strong brews, simple cakes, and a place to pause in the rush of the day. Teenagers on first dates, pensioners reading the paper, and workers grabbing a sandwich all shared the same space. The decor was modest, wooden chairs, lace curtains, but the sense of community was priceless, and it wasn't just about coffee. It was about the hum of conversation, the clink of teaspoons, and the warmth of belonging. By the 1980s, as international coffee chains rose, the coffee pot faded away. Yet for those who grew up with it, the name still conjures memories of simpler times, when coffee meant a break, not a lifestyle statement. The Old Orleans. For a taste of America with a southern twist, diners flocked to the Old Orleans. With jazz music, neon lights, and menus full of burgers, ribs, and cocktails, it offered a sense of fun and escape in the 80s and 90s. Families came for birthday parties, friends for late-night meals, and couples for a slice of New Orleans atmosphere. Staff in themed uniforms, Mardi Gras beads, and oversized menus made every visit feel like an event, and it was indulgent, loud, and unlike anything else on the high street. But rising rents and changing tastes led to its decline. Today, Old Orleans is remembered as more than a restaurant. It was an adventure, proof that even in Grey Britain, a little bit of American jazz and spice could brighten the night. The Forum Cafes. The Forum Cafes of the 60s and 70s were stylish meeting spots, popular with students, artists, and young professionals. With modern interiors, jukeboxes, and continental-inspired menus, they felt fresh and cosmopolitan. A cup of coffee, a plate of chips, or a toasted sandwich was enough to buy hours of conversation. Couples lingered, friends debated politics, and musicians scribbled lyrics on napkins. The Forum wasn't just a cafe, it was culture, connection, and creativity. By the 80s, they had all but vanished, replaced by newer chains. Yet their spirit lingers in every memory of smoky rooms filled with laughter and possibility. The Harvester, early era, before Harvester reinvented itself in the 2000s, its original era in the 70s and 80s had a very different charm. Famous for its salad bars and grill menus, it became a staple of suburban nights out. Families piled plates with croutons, pasta, and endless dressings before tucking into steak, chicken, or ribs. For kids, the salad bar felt like magic, a chance to create your own plate, piling it high without rules. The atmosphere was warm and bustling, a mix of pub comfort and restaurant service. For many, it was where birthdays were celebrated, where families gathered after a long week, where dining out became a treat. Though Harvester still exists, its early style has vanished. But the memory of those first salad bars, the smell of grills, and the clatter of busy dining rooms still captures the taste of a Briton learning to love casual dining. Lyons Corner Cafes, final era, and by the 1960s the famous Lyons Corner Houses were fading, but their smaller cafes still dotted Britain's streets. They offered tea, cakes, sandwiches, and a dependable stop for shoppers and workers. The atmosphere was unmistakable: polished counters, steaming pots of tea, and the clink of china cups. Waitresses, the legendary nippies, kept the pace brisk, serving customers with practiced efficiency. For many families, a trip to Lyon was part of the weekly routine, a moment to sit, chat, and feel the bustle of the city. By the 1970s, the chain finally closed, replaced by modern cafes and coffee bars. But Lyons left behind more than crumbs. It left a legacy of affordable luxury, where an ordinary afternoon could feel just a little special. The Burney Steakhouses. Beyond Burney Inns, the brand later expanded with steakhouse-style dining. They captured the post-war dream: proper meals out, accessible even for working families. Menus were classics: prawn cocktails, rump steaks, and puddings drenched in cream. Dining rooms buzzed with chatter, cigarettes glowed between courses, and waiters carried plates with flair. It wasn't Michelin, but it didn't need to be. For a generation, Burney meant sophistication. Birthdays and anniversaries, even first paychecks were celebrated there. The experience mattered as much as the food: red banquettes, candlelight, and the feeling that you belonged somewhere special. By the late 80s, the steakhouse boom had passed, and Burney was sold off. But for those who dined there, it wasn't just a meal. It was Britain's first taste of affordable glamour, the Golden Egg revival years. During its peak in the late 60s and 70s, the Golden Egg chain became a fixture on high streets nationwide. Its bright signs promised cheerful, affordable dining for families and young couples. Inside, menus featured grills, fry-ups, and desserts like Knickerbocker glories. The chain marketed itself as fun, modern, and accessible, a step up from the corner cafe but still within reach of everyday people. Children loved the sundaes and colourful branding, while adults appreciated reliable meals and quick service. It was never about fine dining. It was about giving the high street a touch of sparkle. By the 80s, the Golden Egg had disappeared, but it remains firmly lodged in memory. For many, it was their first real meal out, the taste of independence and excitement. The Euston Tavern chains. At major train stations like Euston, small pub restaurant hybrids thrived in the 60s and 70s. They weren't glamorous, but for travellers, they were essential. Menus offered pies, sandwiches, and pints served quickly to catch departing trains. Families on holiday, workers commuting, and students heading home all passed through their doors. They vanished as stations modernised, replaced by fast food outlets and polished chains. But their memory lingers in the smell of beer, the rattle of cutlery, and the sense of transience, meals eaten on the edge of journeys. The Lyons Corner House, iconic legacy. At the very top, we return to where it all began, the Lyons Corner House. These weren't just restaurants, they were institutions. Vast dining halls, staffed by hundreds, served thousands daily. They offered everything: teas, roasts, cakes, and ice creams. Music drifted from house orchestras, waitresses bustled, and entire families experienced dining on a grand scale, at prices even the working class could afford. By the 1960s, they symbolised both Britain's past and its transition. Eventually, changing tastes and rising costs brought their end. The last corner house closing in 1977, yet their legacy endures. For millions, Lyons wasn't just food, it was community, aspiration, and memory. Proof that everyday life could be extraordinary. Which of these vanished restaurants would you bring back for just one more meal? Share your memories, because they weren't just places to eat, they were part of Britain's story.